Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lincoln Rockwell.
George Lincoln Rockwell, U.S. Naval Commander, fighter pilot, award-winning illustrator, independent media mogul, and the first American after World War II to openly declare National Socialism as his political ideology.
Why do you think that you can accomplish your mission by following in the footsteps of Adolf Hitler, a man who is so universally despised by all freedom-loving people?
While he and his movement were largely disregarded in his time, Rockwell nonetheless managed to leave a profound impression. His unorthodox outlook and efforts inspired generations of neo-Nazis and other white supremacists that followed, and his influence continues to be seen to this day. While history generally dismisses his untimely death as the inevitable byproduct of the hate he peddled, some question the official version of events. In this video, we're going to look at the life of George Lincoln Rockwell and his American Nazi Party. How did this decorated war veteran, with nearly 20 years of distinguished service to his country, come to fanatically emulate the same powers he fought against? We'll also look at his assassination in 1967 and the man that was convicted of it.
Treatment scum, Negroes, Jews, communists, aliens, and no good people who are trying to take it away from us and tell us that we mustn't even talk about this because it's
George Lincoln Rockwell was born March 9, 1918. His father, George Lovejoy Rockwell, was a vaudeville comedian who performed under the name Doc Rockwell. His mother, Claire, had also come from a show business family and was an accomplished toe dancer herself. Link, as the oldest child in the Rockwell house was known, had a younger brother, Bobby, and a sister, Priscilla. Doc Rockwell's vaudeville career was on the rise, and life on the road would lead to the couple divorcing in 1924. Doc and Claire would share custody of the three children. Claire would move in with her sister Margie, a stern and authoritarian woman who would routinely abuse Link physically and verbally. Doc, meanwhile, was said to display little interest in his children. He was described as always being in character, which in Doc's case mostly meant fast-talking, hyperbolic, and glib.
For the big surprise of the evening. It gives me great pleasure to announce that the Singing Marine is going to sing for us, accompanied by Miss Peggy Randall and Corporal Slim Baxter. Ladies and gentlemen, the Singing Marine.
As a result, he was detached and emotionally unavailable to his kids. Link would lobby for his attention by adopting his mannerisms and, according to family, had become a copy of his father at an early age. Through the Great Depression of the 1930s, Doc Rockwell continued to find success in theater and radio, which gave his family relative stability. Rockwell headlined the premier vaudeville venue, New York's Palace Theater. Link had taught himself how to play several instruments in his teens and formed a makeshift big band that he called the Phantoms of Swing. Playing dances around Booth Bay Harbor, his penchant for showmanship and Carnival Barker-style approach to hustling were already beginning to show. Thanks in part to his father's connections, Link enrolled in Brown University in the fall of 1938. He majored in philosophy while serving as editor for the school newspaper Sir Brown. While attending, he met Pembroke student Judith Altman. The two would get married in 1943 and have 3 daughters together. In 1940, Rockwell dropped out of college and accepted an officer's commission in the U.S. Navy. He trained as a fighter pilot, but mostly flew reconnaissance and transport missions in the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. He was regarded as a capable pilot and officer, and took well to the structure and discipline of military life. After the war, Rockwell remained with the Naval Reserve. He enrolled in the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, where he studied commercial art. In 1948, he won a $1,000 award from the New York Society of Illustrators for an ad he designed for the American Cancer Society. According to his resume, he was also a special student of renowned commercial artist Norman Rockwell. No relation. He nonetheless dropped out in his last year at Pratt and returned to Maine, where he started Maine Advertising Incorporated and a printing firm, Rockwell Publishing. One of his forward-thinking efforts from around that time was a weekly guide to area radio programming that predated TV Guide. Rockwell was recalled to active duty with the Navy in 1950 when the Korean War began to break out. By now a lieutenant commander, he was stationed in San Diego where he trained fighter pilots. During his time in San Diego, he was reportedly exposed to anti-Semitic literature for the first time. Rockwell had grown up around racist and anti-Semitic sentiments, but had been taught that they were to be kept to oneself outside the home. He came across a copy of Mein Kampf, which was said to have piqued his interest. Rockwell developed a particular admiration for General Douglas MacArthur and Senator Joe McCarthy of Wisconsin. Both prominent World War II figures endorsed zero-tolerance policies for communist or Marxist sympathies.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many.
And declared any such behaviors to be outright treason to the United States.
And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
In November 1952, a transfer to Iceland resulted in separation from his family. By this time, his marriage to Judy had deteriorated to the point he'd become physically abusive with her. Rockwell reportedly clashed with Judy's parents over their failure to raise their daughter to be appropriately submissive. While stationed in Keflavik, Rockwell met Thora Hallgrimsson, 23-year-old niece of Iceland's ambassador to the U.S. George divorced Judith and married Thora in October 1953. Their honeymoon included a tour of the Eagle's Nest in Germany, Hitler's retreat. The two would go on to have 3 sons and a daughter. Rockwell completed his tour of duty in 1954 and relocated to the Washington, D.C. area. By this time, he'd taken an interest in conservative activism and saw opportunity in being close to the nation's capital. He briefly worked for leading conservative figure William F. Buckley. Rockwell was tasked with promoting Buckley's magazine, The American Mercury, but by his own admission put little effort in and left the job after 6 months. Rockwell started the American Service Publishing Company, Incorporated. He tried to start up his own magazine, to be called the Conservative Times, but was unsuccessful. In September 1955, he launched U.S. Lady, a free publication targeting service wives that was distributed mainly at military bases. Rockwell had a vision of using the magazine to propagate his increasingly right-leaning views. His editorial from the first issue already shows a running theme of loyalty. Rockwell sold his stake in U.S. Lady after only 4 issues had been published. What exactly transpired is unclear. Most accounts state he had to sell his share at a loss. In his autobiography, Rockwell himself cites 2 reasons. First, his partner, Landrum Allen, exploited his business naivete to eventually elbow him out. Second was having too many women on his staff. Rockwell claimed he was able to get U.S. Lady off the ground without a payroll through sheer morale building, though later he admitted he got by on wheedling, cajoling, promising, and threatening. In speeches and interviews, he would later claim that he sold U.S. Lady at a profit to dedicate himself more fully to political activities. According to the FBI, in August 1959, Rockwell reached out to the Assembly of Captive European Nations about an anti-communist exhibit they had on display. Rockwell proposed duplicating the exhibit to set up in multiple locations across the country during Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev's planned visit to the U.S. the following month, believing that it would be profitable. As conversation drifted towards his enthusiasm for Nazism, Rockwell pointed to his being forced out of U.S. Lady as the catalyst for his radical beliefs. He stated he had never been anti-Semitic until the Jews had caused him to lose his magazine. In 1956, he met DeWest Hooker, who'd recruited a handful of juvenile delinquents in New York for his Nationalist Youth League. We'll come back to the Nationalist Youth League later. By 1958, he'd met up with Harold Arrowsmith Jr., his first of 3 major patrons. Arrowsmith's resentment of the Jews came from his belief that they were the puppet masters behind the communist revolution in Russia and continued to spread Marxist ideology with the expressed aim of world domination. Arrowsmith's pastime was to pore over microfilm at the Library of Congress for evidence to support his beliefs. He gave Rockwell 2 documents that would be particularly formative. The first was a 1920 article from the Sunday Herald by Winston Churchill titled Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. In it, Churchill distinguishes Zionists as good Jews and bad Jews, or international Jews, as a sinister confederacy, adding that Leon Trotsky and other leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution were Jewish. The second document was a British intelligence report on the Bolshevik Revolution from 1919 that also states that the revolution was led by Jewish forces. Aerosmith came from old money out of New York and had the means to provide financial support for Rockwell to run propaganda and public demonstrations. He agreed to bankroll a house to live and work out of and supplied a printing outfit he owned. By summer of 1958, under the name National Committee to Free America from Jewish Domination, Rockwell began publishing copies of the Churchill article along with the British intelligence report. On July 28th, Rockwell and a few miners he'd rounded up from the now-defunct Nationalist Youth League held their first picket outside the White House, protesting U.S. involvement in conflict in Lebanon. While his prediction of being murdered by 300 blacks at the direction of Jewish forces turned out to be incorrect, he began to notice that playing into reactionary stereotypes got him the more visceral response he was hoping for. To Rockwell, the logical extension of this was to taunt detractors with pro-Nazi sentiments. He began printing pamphlets with titles like Who's a Hate Monger and How to Stop World War III under the name World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists. Rockwell began canvassing the D.C. area with these pamphlets. In November, he unknowingly left one at the home of an FBI agent. On October 12, 1958, 50 sticks of dynamite were detonated inside Hebrew Benevolent Congregation Temple in Atlanta, Georgia. One of the suspects arrested in connection with the attack, Wallace Allen, knew Rockwell and had a letter from him mentioning a big blast. News of Rockwell's connection to the attack all but ended his father's career and humiliated Doc, who had many close Jewish friends from the entertainment industry. Rockwell's wife and children had already returned to Iceland without him at the insistence of Thora's father, who disapproved of Rockwell's political activities. Aerosmith became uneasy with his open adoption of Nazism, withdrew monetary support, and began repossessing the house and printing equipment. Rockwell bought some time by claiming squatters' rights. A young supporter named James Conrad Warner sent him a large red banner with a swastika in a show of solidarity. On March 8, 1959, Rockwell hung the banner in the entry room of the house he was squatting in, lit up the interior, and opened the front door, putting the banner on full display to the neighborhood. Arlington police soon began receiving dozens of complaints from neighbors. On March 20th, a group of 50 to 100 area teens converged on the Williamsburg Road house for a semi-coordinated rumble. Rockwell had built a small circle of party loyalists who lived on site with him. Dressed in khaki paramilitary uniforms and visibly armed, they tried to intimidate the jeering crowd with Nazi stormtrooper posturing, but the police were needed to break up the gathering. Acting as his own attorney, Rockwell began filing a string of libel suits that spring, including a $500,000 suit against Aerosmith, who'd called him a con man and a blackmailer to the press. He also filed a $1 complaint against Arlington Commonwealth prosecutor William Hassan, just for the pleasure of it. On April 21st, Hassan responded to growing public pressure by indicting Rockwell on moral corruption and public nuisance charges. The house was raided and police seized cartons of literature, 8 swastika armbands, 2 pistols, 1 rifle, a tear gas pen, a bronze plaque of Hitler, and a 5-by-11-foot swastika flag. The charges would ultimately be dismissed. In May, Rockwell briefly campaigned against what he saw as a Jewish conspiracy against the stamp collector community. He was evicted from the Williamsburg Road house and spent much of the summer in a cabin in rural Fairfax County. In September, Rockwell returned to Iceland in hopes of reuniting with his family, but Thora could no longer accept his extremism and repeatedly turned him away. Back in Arlington, Rockwell couch-surfed and drank heavily. He came to the conclusion he had nothing left to lose, and that October, the World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists became the American Nazi Party.
These stormtroopers of the American Nazi Party are training for the day when they will take over the government of the United States.
In the year 63, I joined the American Nazi Party because at the time, and which it still is the only party in the right wing which is fighting the real enemy, which is fighting the enemy on its own grounds where it should be fought to save this country. It's the only party who is using the real issues which only the white man could use to win by, and that is race.
I joined the American Nazi Party because I got tired of seeing the American people, the white race, and the government of this country bending and breaking under the pressure of Jew communist agitators for race mixing and treason.
Well, I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and schooled there. And afterwards, I studied business administration at the University of Wisconsin back home. A little bit later, I joined the Marine Corps. And it was a few years later when I was working for one of the largest encyclopedia companies in the Midwest, in Chicago, that I joined the party.
I joined the party because they fought race mixing and communism, and I believe it's the only action group in the entire right wing.
I joined the American Nazi Party because it's the only organization that fights communism and race mixing, and it's the only organization that does anything about Negro crime in the United States.
When I first served the party, Mr. Terry, I was in San Quentin Prison, that's in the state of California. I was there for armed robbery and narcotics. My life until that time had been just utter chaos and didn't amount to anything. And when I first heard about the party, that's where I was. I was at the bottom. And when I heard about the party, it gave me hope. Because until that time, I'd been living in an environment of race mixing and rottenness that I could never adjust to. And it gave me hope when I found out about the party.
I joined the American Nazi Party because I think it's the only organization destined to put a stop to communism and race mixing and put the control of this country back into the hands of the white Christian majority which built it.
I heard of Commander Rockwell in Houston, Texas, where I was raised. At the time I heard of him, I was employed as a digital computer programmer. I had graduated from the University of Houston with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, and I've been working at this job for 2 years. I'd always been interested in politics, and I've always considered myself a racist. And when I heard about Commander Rockwell, I had nothing to do but to come here.
You might say I was gifted with the foresight to see what this country was slowly becoming. It was heading straight for a downfall, and I had been fortunate to obtain a copy of Mein Kampf, and I have read it, and I saw exactly what Hitler pointed out when he said the Jews were leading to the downfall for a nation and race. And after reading Mein Kampf, you might say that the only thing left to do was join the American Nazi Party.
The reason I joined the American Nazi Party is because it has the only solution for destroying communism and Jewish race mixing.
Stormtroopers come and go. One man holds the party together. In a sense, the American Nazi Party is George Lincoln Rockwell.
Oh, is that right? All right. Are you actually filming this?
Commander George Lincoln Rockwell, you are head of the American Nazi Party?
Yes, sir.
How can you possibly justify leading an organization whose objectives are the liquidation of the Jews, the removal of the Negroes to Africa, and the turning of the United States into a fascist state?
Well, I don't know where you got those supposed objectives, but they're ridiculous.
But the main thing that we are fighting for is the preservation of the white race. We think the white race is what has made possible the American constitutional republic, which we think is the greatest form of government in the world.
We find that the Jews are behind, many of them are behind the Negro problems. We find that the Jews are behind communism. We find that they're behind degenerate art. All of these things we can prove, of course, by facts. I don't have time here to answer that question fully. However, the main problem facing the world, we believe, is the Jews who are behind these things.
There are some that suggest that Rockwell adopted the swastika as a publicity stunt alone, but this is not true. He and his followers use the swastika because they are serious Nazis.
And we feel that the way to solve the problem is to try each individual Jew who is suspected of complicity in communism or any form of treason before an American jury. And if he's found guilty of treason, the Constitution says that he should be executed, and I believe the Founding Fathers were wise in so providing.
What we are is Nazis, which means basically that we are racists.
The second most important is the Negro problem. The Negro people we feel sorry for. We don't blame them. We don't feel they're evil or vicious. We feel it's just like a bunch of monkeys had been let out of a zoo by a group of Jews and given bottles and whiskey and guns and so forth. You wouldn't hate the monkeys, but you'd certainly want them back in the zoo.
The average Negro, you go over here on 7th Avenue and I'll show you thousands of them that are inferior swine.
Let me say this. In the Congo, they have black supremacy. There's no question about it. A white person, it doesn't hold office. They wouldn't tolerate a white president. this country is a white country and it has the right to remain white. We don't believe that the colored people should be pushed around, but they certainly should stop pushing the white people around.
Commander, your views on Negroes strike me as being viciously extreme.
They're
Do you
extreme.
disagree with that
No,
characterization?
sir. They're not vicious, but they're extreme.
Rockwell had met his second major backer, Floyd Fleming, through connections he'd made in far-right circles. Fleming, a World War I veteran, shared Rockwell's hatred of Jews and appreciated his willingness to take action against them. While he wasn't nearly as independently wealthy as Aerosmith, Fleming had enough savings to purchase a house on Randolph Street to serve as the headquarters for the newly minted American Nazi Party. When Rockwell applied for a permit to set up party operations on the property on January 11, 1960, the realtor that handled the sale of the house expressed outrage. He said that Fleming had led him to believe the older couple would reside at the house themselves and use some of it for his contracting business, and he would not have knowingly done business with an avowed Nazi. By now, word of Rockwell's political affairs had reached the brass at the U.S. Navy, where he still held the rank of commander as a reservist. On January 6th, he was given notice of potential suspension, which stated, "Your known views espousing race and religious hatred would render ineffective your status as an officer commanding men made up, at least in part, of members of the various races and religions at which your propaganda is aimed." Rockwell appeared for a formal hearing February 1st. He read an 8-page defense of his beliefs and how he reconciles them with unwavering loyalty to his country. J.V. Morgan offered a character reference, and Ben Friedman, an acquaintance and fellow traveler whose Jewish background Rockwell would frequently use as cover for charges of anti-Semitism, gave a 40-minute diatribe accusing Assistant Secretary of Defense Anna Rosenberg of being a communist. Nonetheless, Rockwell was given an honorable discharge from the Navy after 19.5 years, just 6 months short of qualifying for a retirement pension. The American Nazi Party began handing out party literature on Saturdays at the corner of 13th and F Street in Washington, D.C. The party's first serial publication, the National Socialist Bulletin, debuted in May. Rockwell applied for a permit to hold a rally on July 4th in New York's Union Square and was promptly denied by the city. After an appeal hearing in front of the New York Supreme Court on June 22nd, Rockwell gave a brief interview to the press. Here's what happened next.
Do you think that most Jews are traitors? I unfortunately think that a great large number of them are. I have no scientific way of judging how many, but my experience has been that either Jews are mixed up in it or they actively oppose any exposure of it. Do you have any percentage of estimate on the percentage of Jews that you would say are traitors? A very loose estimate, which I have no backing for except my own guess, and that's 80%. You think that if you came to power that about 80% of the Jews would have to be tried and executed? I suspect that.
Came outside, I'd break his neck for him. You hear me? You dirty bum, you! You call 80% of the Jews traitors?
How would, Mr. Rockwell, how do you react to this kind of treatment? I'm used to it. I'm used to it. These people have done this, and they never do it for the communists, only for the Jews, only for the communists. In other words, they never make such a fuss over communist speaking. It's only when somebody
No,
who's an
only over
anti-communist.
dogs that spew disease all over the place. Dogs like you that have the gall to come in here and do what you do. Look, this is now a public event. It's not your private interest.
Look, we got a camera here. Stand away from it. Leave the lane, will you? The Jews that are doing this.
Get him the hell out of here. Make it up. He works for the communists, this guy.
All right, stand away from it. Leave the lane.
How much do you get from the communists for fomenting this disorder, you animal? Get him out! Get him out!
When an arrest warrant for disorderly conduct was issued, Rockwell avoided activities in New York until he spoke at Hofstra University in 1964.
I'm informed that I will be arrested, whether or not I go into New York City, and have no money for bail and no money for a lawyer.
On July 3rd, one of his Sunday speeches at the Washington Mall broke out in violence. The event was captured on 8mm film.
We believe in this country, and we are going to protect this country and the right people, no matter how long it takes. Ladies and gentlemen, you had a great American hero! A short while ago! Ladies and gentlemen, you had a senator named Joe McCarthy. And Joe McCarthy gave his life for this country, for this Constitution, and for this America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the surprising thing is that every Jewish organization, every Jew in America with one exception, was working full time to get rid of Joe McCarthy. There were Catholics on one side and Catholics on the other, Protestants on one side and Protestants on the other, but all the Jews were against Joe McCarthy. All the Jews were against General Douglas MacArthur.
Rockwell, along with several other ANP members, were arrested on disorderly conduct charges. Rockwell insisted on fighting the charges, seeing an opportunity to get his ideology on legal record and possibly sway courts. At his hearing on July 6th, prosecuting attorney Clark King expressed concerns about Rockwell's mental competency and had him placed on an involuntary hold for psychiatric assessment. Rockwell was committed to St. Elizabeth's for 30 days, but was discharged after 10 when the doctors determined he was not suffering from an acute psychiatric disorder. In his essay on the experience, Rockwell claims his commitment had been orchestrated by Jewish forces and appears to believe that he had converted the doctors, some of whom were Jewish, to his beliefs. He wrote his first book, This Time the World, over the rest of 1960. Part autobiography, part semi-organized ideological musing, This Time the World would see its first edition self-published by the party. With their printing capabilities upgraded and better refined, the ANP began putting out the Rockwell Report. The first issue was released October 15, 1961. The following February, the National Socialist Bulletin was revamped with a more professional and sophisticated layout. The Stormtrooper would be their flagship magazine through its 6-year run. At the time, no bookstores that relied on major publishers for wholesale could afford the backlash from carrying American Nazi Party literature. They mainly sold their publications through mail order, subscriptions, and at street events. The boost in membership and merchandise sales allowed the ANP to purchase a second property on Wilson Boulevard to house party officers and provide additional space for operations. While party members referred to it as the barracks, the press soon nicknamed it Hatemonger Hill. In 1961, Rockwell began building an alliance with the Nation of Islam. The Nation preached black separatism. It was on this point that Rockwell saw common ground and saw value in openly supporting the group, despite the seeming contradiction. He was particularly impressed with the leader of the New York Mosque, Malcolm X.
There is one great Negro leader that I admire, and I understand that I hope I can be helpful in getting him here, and that's either Elijah Muhammad or Malcolm X. Now, these are great leaders. I wish to God we had one white leader of the stature of Malcolm X. Just one. In our government. If you don't believe me, you wait till he stands up here and talks to you. That's a man. When you see that man, you'll see a man that'll stand up and talk to you, right up to you, square and fair. He won't cringe or kowtow or black Tom or anything else. And neither will he be arrogant. He's a man and he's a leader.
Meanwhile, Malcolm had this to say about Rockwell after leaving the Nation of Islam in 1964.
When I saw it, I dispatched a wire to Rockwell. Rockwell was one of the agitators down there. Rockwell, this Lincoln Rockwell. And the wire said, in essence, that this is to warn him that I am no longer held in check from fighting white supremacists by Elijah Muhammad's separatist black Muslim movement, and that if Rockwell's presence in Alabama causes harm to come to Dr. King or any other black person in Alabama who's doing nothing other than trying to enjoy their rights, then Rockwell and his Ku Klux Klan friends would be met with maximum retaliation from those of us who are not handcuffed by this nonviolent philosophy. And I haven't heard from Rockwell since.
And another one that he had made a deal with was this man Rockwell. Rockwell and Elijah Muhammad are regular correspondents with each other. You can hate me for telling you this, but I'm going to tell it to you. Rockwell attended the rallies because Elijah Muhammad put the OK on it. And Sharif, the captain of the FOI, and I had discussed it, wondering why Rockwell could come to our meetings.
If you're not working for the enemy, how come you get invited to so many liberal pinko colleges to speak?
Well, as you must remember from your own youth, when you're a young guy, especially in college, you like to raise hell. Kids just love to be naughty. And whatever the old man and the parents and the teachers say you mustn't do, that's what they want to do. Now, conservatives just aren't naughty enough to be exciting. They're not dramatic. But we're terrible. I mean, George Lincoln Rockwell, that's really a bad guy. And when a kid in a college invites me to come and speak, this is a big challenge, a big thrill. And the kids turn out by the thousands. They pack, every time I speak at a college, I draw the biggest audiences they've ever had at the colleges. My experience has been, they're first horrified. They want to see this fascist beast. They expect a man with horns, and they expect blood dripping off my fangs. Well, when I get up there and I talk to them, and I'm reasonably rational, and I don't rage, and I don't carry on and pound the podium and throw stuff at them, all the lies by the enemy backfire on them. They've been told that I'm a monster and I'm also going to advocate killing all the Jews and killing the Negroes and so forth. They find that's not true. So I am able to reach the minds and the hearts of our youth in the university. And the reason they invite me, basically, I think, is to be naughty. I don't care the reason they invite me. The main thing is they do invite me, and I get a chance to talk. When they invite a communist, they very often invite me to show that they're open-minded and even, and also invite a dirty Nazi. Well, I don't care what the reason is. I get a chance to win them.
Mr. Rockwell, is it true that your topic this afternoon will be freedom of speech?
Yes, sir, it is. That will be this topic, and I'm going to stick to it.
Whose idea was it for you not to appear in uniform, Mr. Rockwell?
I never appear in uniform. I am not here to agitate. When I go out in the streets and I have to reach masses of people, I use agitational methods. I am here to discuss philosophical ideas and not to agitate, and I don't want to embarrass the people that were good enough to invite me.
By 1962, Rockwell had begun speaking engagements at colleges around the country. On some occasions, the school or outside media documented the event. Rockwell himself had already adopted a habit of secretly recording his activities out of paranoia. He would go on to sell copies of the recordings he felt went especially well through A&P literature. In engaging with the public, Rockwell thrived on confrontation, controversy, and provocation. Some campuses had the foresight to counter this by strongly encouraging the students in attendance to maintain decorum and refuse to offer any emotional response. Since a number of these recordings have been preserved, we can hear how Rockwell adapted his approach to these different settings. The earliest available recording comes from March 8, 1962. While speaking at San Diego State University, Rockwell was attacked by a Jewish student.
You'll have to just wait.
The oldest remaining complete speech took place on October 8th of that year at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. In proper Midwest fashion, the attendees followed faculty advisement and remained cordial and stoic throughout. We hear Rockwell lay out the approach he would continue to employ on campuses for the next 5 years. His first move would generally be to try to disarm the crowd by subverting expectations.
Let me say that I agree with almost everything the dean said. I have a couple of reservations, but on most cases, I agree heartily with what he says. I intend to be as careful as possible not to abuse this opportunity. I realize that I'm a guest here, and that it has cost the university and the students, Mr. Von Leeuwenhoek, the dean, and all the other people a good bit of, probably a lot of sleep in order to get me here, and I'm very grateful. I realize that I cannot convert anybody here today.
For added effect, he would use humor, often at his own expense, to varying degrees of success.
Hospital that is in a predominantly Negro area. It is essential that you obtain a transfusion of whole blood. The only blood available is blood-giving occasion. Would you let this blood pass through your circulatory system, this blood from a Negro, in order to preserve your life?
I am 100% a realist, ladies and gentlemen. I will accept blood from Sandy Davis Jr.
I did think one thing was good in his speech, his remark about Sammy Davis Jr., which I thought was quite amusing.
You don't even need much of an address. All you need is George Lincoln Rockwell, Arlington, Virginia. They know where I am.
You can write to me. You don't need any other address than Arlington, Virginia. They know where I am.
If anybody can prove that I'm up here lying about these documents, or they don't exist, or they're phonies or forgeries, I will fold up the American Nazi Party and go to work for Martin Luther King and Harry Golden for nothing.
If anybody can prove that these documents are phony, or I'm lying about what they are, I will go to work for Martin Luther King and Harry Golden and the NAACP for nothing.
It's here that his father's influence as a performer can be heard, particularly in Rockwell's cadence and delivery.
So at this time, in recognition of your intrepid spirit of pioneering, the same spirit that drove Eric the Red to discover mercurochrome, that driving urge that caused Christopher Columbus to search for a shortcut to India and bring back spice so that Isabella could have cinnamon toast, we salute you tonight.
Send for the documents before you dare to turn to your neighbor and say those are phony documents or he's taking it out of context. I'm going to do my best to give you some samples, and I beg you, check them all, because they are shocking, they're surprising, and they're almost unbelievable. So therefore, I beg you, please send for the photostatic copies, not just written copies, but photostatic copies of each one, along with the source and the citations where you can get them yourself.
Was the audience brought closer to his side, or at least less against him? Rockwell would go on to tie communism to Jews, operating under the implicit mutual agreement that communism was an altogether evil and destructive force. Rockwell would outline evidence of Jewish saturation in the establishment and spread of communism. With communism and Judaism conflated, he could then use any perceived connection of either to support his grand theory of a conspiracy to overtake world powers. Anyone associated with civil rights or later anti-war efforts that had a Jewish-sounding last name, or any vague history of possible Marxist sympathies, was evidence enough that the same globalist cabal was masterminding it.
Or why don't you start off tight on each one of them and then draw back if you want. What did you think of Mr. Rockwell's speech?
Well, I thought it was very interesting, and I was unmoved completely. I didn't think he really said much at all. He just I think he tried to build his image on his war record and to try to hit our emotions, but he didn't seem to do anything to me at all.
I was unmoved. I felt that he had nothing concrete to say, and I could punch holes through his statements.
I thought it was very educational and very enlightening.
In what respects?
In what respects? Well, I've heard a little bit on television and read a little bit in the newspapers about what he's done and what he's said, and I found that he's not a rabble-rouser. Well, he doesn't have to be. And if one looks for it, one can find many, many logical flaws in his statements, and he's quite a hypocrite when you come down to it.
Well, I thought his speech was very disappointing in the sense that at various points he completely disregarded the logical argument, and I found a tremendous amount of irrationalities in his statements. I don't think the statements he made could have held up in an argument.
Well, I thought it was a very important one, very educational one for everybody. His discussion of emotional engineering is actually his divulging of his secret of talking to people is something we can all take to heart and something we can all think about, because if people can be gotten over like this, then this is something to reckon with. This is not just a guerrilla who spouts hate, but this is a very devilishly clever man, and a man who knows how to get what he wants. Yeah.
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
All right, hold on. You say you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant?
Yes, and
what did you think of the speech?
I think Mr. Rockwell did us all a great favor today in that he told us, in his own terms, how it was possible for a man to win the masses to his way of thinking. In other words, this is the same thing that Hitler did in Germany. He won the masses to his way of thinking.
Do you think anyone here was swayed?
I don't think so. I think we were all able to weed out the propaganda and so forth in Mr. Rockwell's speech. And actually he told us that this is the way that he's winning the masses, and that we should all come along and be part of the masses and give in to his emotional method
In August 1962, Rockwell traveled to the UK to meet with like-minded Europeans, including British neo-Nazi Colin Jordan. The group named themselves the World Union of National Socialists and drafted an organizational code they called the Cotswold Agreements. On August 9th, Rockwell was arrested by Scotland Yard and deported back to the States. While boarding the plane, he gave a Nazi salute to the press corps.
Why do you give the Hitler salute?
This is part of the, I don't know what you want, it builds morale.
Men, we're going to go down to the district building and picket against Martin Luther King and his gang, who are trying to get the little white children bused into the Negro sections of town to go to the Negro schools. All of you, I'm sure, realize what's going to happen to those little white kids who are all alone in those black schools, especially the little girls. I want you to think about that when you're down there on that picket line, and no matter what they throw at you, no matter whether they threaten you with arrest or anything else, I want you to stand fast. I want you to picket. The picket will last 5 hours, and I want you to stick with it all the way, and let the American people see that there's some opposition to this filthy communist race mixing. Are there any questions? All right, if not, I want you to get in the truck and wait for me. I'll be right over. Go get them. All right, let's go!
Rockwell and the American Nazi Party spent much of 1963 focused on ground-level opposition to civil rights and integration demonstrations. Martin Luther King Jr. in particular had been an early target of Rockwell's racial animosity. He saw King's March on Washington, which was scheduled for August 28th, as a major opportunity to score a win for the party. In 1964, Rockwell founded his own record label, Hatenanny Records, a play on the term hootenanny, which had been popularized by the folk music craze of the early 60s, appeared to have a total of 2 7-inch singles in their catalog. The first was credited to Otis Cochran and the Three Bigots. Here's a clip of Otis performing the A-side of that single.
Right now I'd like to ship them niggers back one time. Ring that bell, shout for joy, white man's day is here. Together all those equals up and hurt them on the pier. America for white, Africa for black. Send those apes back to the free, ship those niggers back. Ring that bell, shout for joy, white man's day is here. 20 million ugly films already on the pier. America for white, Africa for black. Send those apes back to the free, ship those niggers back.
The second single is credited to George L. Rockwell and the Coon Hunters.
We don't want no niggers for our neighbors, 'cause we love the red, white, and blue. The big little boys will steal you right, and there isn't anything that they won't do. So let's send them back to Ethiopia, where they can march upon the street. They're contaminating all the city, and they want to set in the high seas. Who needs a nigger when going to school? Who wants a teacher that's only a fool? Who wants a nigger to show him the way when he's in the dark all night and all day?
All I am is the offspring of millions of years of evolution which has produced white Christian civilization. I am one example of it, not a Superman. But I think that compared to an aborigine in Africa who eats his grandmother, and they're still eating people over there, I think I am, and so are you. We're all Supermen compared to those cruds.
In January 1965, Rockwell came closest to his goal of personally confronting Martin Luther King. Dr. King was in Selma, Alabama to meet with the Southern Christian Leadership Council. Rockwell was able to get himself in frame with the civil rights leader for one photo. Floyd Fleming had become frustrated with Rockwell's poor management of finances and inability to make good on his arrangements, so he'd begun the process of evicting the American Nazi Party from the Randolph Street house. By the end of 1965, the IRS would seize the house and all the property on site, including the printing equipment. But by now, Rockwell had connected with his final major patron, Robert Surrey. Surrey had been a member of the John Birch Society and worked as aide to General Edwin Walker on his 1962 campaign for governor of Texas. He'd written the "Wanted for Treason" leaflet that was passed around Dallas days before President Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963. Like Rockwell, Surrey felt that the Birchers were ineffective in the face of a credible threat to the American way.
The only man I know who is standing up, calling it state a state, and fighting on the real issues is Commander George Lincoln Rockwell.
So the two had begun establishing a party branch in Dallas in 1964. From the earliest days of the American Nazi Party, Rockwell had set a goal of winning the presidency by 1972. Rockwell felt he'd made enough progress by 1965 to test run his political odds in a run for governor of Virginia that year. He removed any swastikas or Nazi references from his campaign, instead appealing to the racial solidarity with a bars and stars themed design and a slogan of "Vote White."
The people, particularly in Dallas, they just wouldn't let me talk about any possibility of anything else except total success.
The line between his governor run and the A&P Dallas grew blurrier with what was put out as the official campaign film. The first half consists of Rockwell and Surrey discussing party aims and achievements, along with stormtrooper testimonials. The second half is a monologue from Rockwell that roughly approximates his 2 television appearances during the campaign, though the introduction suggests it was intended for different use.
Ladies and gentlemen, I recognize that any group that has the courage to come and give me a hearing is not any kindergarten group of political students. Anybody who has come here to see this presentation and to hear what I have to say and judge it for himself is what I would call a graduate student of politics, and certainly no kindergarten student, so I am not going to waste any time in this presentation going into the basic fundamental facts of the communist conspiracy, the fact that the communists are behind the so-called Black Revolution, the attempt to force everybody in the United States to integrate, and I am not even going to go very deeply into the fact that communism is Jewish. I don't think you would have ever come here to hear me or meet with this group if you weren't already aware of that fact.
In the elections that followed, 500,000 Virginians went to the polls. 6,000 voted for Rockwell.
You want to say anything about the Virginia election first?
The thing I have to say about the Virginia election...
Wait a minute, let's roll. It'd be blacked out. What?
I understand it's in excess of 7,000, and that's all I know. Do you know how much I got?
No. Last I heard it was 6,700.
67? Not 67,000, 6,700.
67,000.
In April 1966, Rockwell met with writer Alex Haley at the Wilson Boulevard home for an interview for Playboy magazine. 13 years later, the encounter would be dramatized in Haley's made-for-TV film Roots: The Next Generation. Marlon Brando won an Emmy Award for his portrayal of Rockwell opposite James Earl Jones as Haley.
Before we begin, I would like to ask you why you are keeping that pistol there.
It's just a precaution. I don't mix with your kind, and we call your race niggers. Don't you know all this equality garbage was started by a Jew anthropologist, like our hatenannies.
Could you give us an example of a hatenanny lyric?
Ring the bell, shout for joy. White Man's Day is here. 20 million ugly coons waiting on the pier. America for whites, Africa for blacks. Hand that ugly chimp his stick. Hand that coon his spear. The Jews are through in 72, parlez-vous. The Jews are through in 72, parlez-vous. We'll feed them bacon till they yell and send them all to kosher hell. Hinky-dinky parlez-vous.
As was his custom, Rockwell kept his pocket tape recorder running during his time with Haley. Portions of the audio which have survived suggest a more cordial exchange than Haley presents.
Do you feel that there is a pattern within the area encompassed by Gentiles only that
where this rottenness is there's more incidences.
Oh, yes, yes.
Among racial religions.
In cities. I think that we are going to have to find a way to bring the people in cities, particularly the super sophisticated, to an appreciation of nature. And what used to be called porn, I think that just humor, the humor of Lenny Bruce is some of the, although he happens to be Jewish, there's some Gentiles who appreciate this. And I think this is a sign of rottenness inside, decaying, degeneracy. And that in order to stop it, we've got to give our people a feeling for the land, for nature.
What do you have to do for relaxation?
I don't get very much relaxation. When you see how the cell phone rings and what goes on here, no matter what I do, I get interrupted. The only thing that I can enjoy anymore, I can't chase women, I can't drink, I can't have any ordinary normal pleasures. The only one I have left is music. I have my stereo here. And that's the only thing I can do.
As sentiment over escalation in the Vietnam War gelled into grassroots activism, Rockwell added what he called peace creeps to a flexible and ever-expanding list of communist initiatives. The sight of a communist flag at a peace rally was enough to convince Rockwell that the burgeoning flower power movement would be their next masterstroke.
Down with communism! Long live Commander Rockwell! All commies! Long live Commander Rockwell! Hey, this is what's going to happen to your commie friends! You seen us burn their flag, didn't you? That's what we're going to do to every one of them if we ever get the chance. That's right.
What good are you going to do now?
Do it again when we get out. Every time we see communism, we're going to stop it. Sieg Heil!
Now, I want to hear you peace creeps laugh. Right at this minute when I'm speaking, there are American kids getting killed over there fighting communism. And when I said that on November 27th, a bunch of you peace creeps laughed. Now laugh! Come on, let's hear you laugh. I want these conservatives and these right-wingers that think we're going to win this thing by passing out literature to hear you people and see you apes. You civil rights apes laughing about American kids getting killed. If I had a home and it was invaded by a rapist trying to rape my wife, do you think I would allow a discussion among my children whether we ought to fight the rapist? No, you think that's good. I was told in World War II that the Germans were a bunch of no-goods, and I went out there and fought them and killed these white Christian people on behalf of communism.
In November 1966, Rockwell spoke at his former school, Brown University. Going from dropout to noteworthy, albeit controversial guest speaker was a major victory for him on a personal level. By 1967, the American Nazi Party was renamed National Socialist White People's Party in an effort to de-emphasize Nazi aesthetics. Rockwell was devoting his attention to consolidating his vision of National Socialism into a definitive text.
Major, what has he been doing, let's say in the last 2 or 3 weeks or the last month? What kind of activities has he been engaged in?
Well, he's been planning some major steps forward. For example, he was all set to come out with a book called White Power, which...
His manifesto, White Power, would not be released before his death. However, Rockwell had completed a working draft, which was likely printed with little to no further revision. The contents of the book reflect the evolution of Rockwell's college speeches by this stage, as both share talking points and a literary framework. Rockwell's naval experience and passion for boating are seen in the nautical themes he used to illustrate his philosophy. Rockwell describes the U.S.'s standing as a global superpower, which he considers a testament to the white race's inherent talent for advancing civilization, as the ship of state. The Death Rattle in Chapter 1 is a rundown of Rockwell's social grievances of the moment, all of which he sees as communist and/or Jewish efforts to undermine the country. Chapter 2, Spiritual Syphilis, blames the decadence and insanity of the Summer of Love on the baby boomers' lack of a devotion to a cause they deeply believe will better their world. The brief chapter presents Party Captain Robert Lloyd as a case study for the spiritual turnaround the ANP offered to aimless juvenile delinquents.
Lieutenant Lloyd!
This is Robert Surrey. Nice to meet you, Lloyd. I wonder if you'd tell Mr. Surrey what you were doing when you first heard of the party and how you got into the party. Yes, sir. Well, a couple of years before I went off to college, in Richmond, where I came from, there were a lot of students and so forth, and bohemians and so forth, who call themselves writers and artists, and who are actually a little more than beatniks. And I got involved and became friendly with these people, and eventually I opened up a place called Mule Fed, which was a beatnik-type coffee house in which a lot of immoral activity went on, including dope taking and so forth. And at the time when I first heard about the party, I was closely associated with these people, and I finally pulled myself away from them after I did hear about the party and learned what a great thing it was.
I think that you should tell also the fact, Captain Lloyd, that you no longer drink, or well, you don't smoke.
No, sir, I gave all those things up after I joined the party. I don't drink or smoke anymore, and of course I don't take anything like drugs like I used to. The party has really led me to a clean and honorable life.
In other words, in national socialism, you feel you found a program for clean moral living.
Yes, sir, and I think that the youth of America will eventually find the same thing as I have.
Thank you much, Captain Lloyd.
Yes, sir.
An example of Lloyd's potential that had been squandered before finding purpose in the American Nazi Party was his stunt on the House floor during the inaugural session of Congress in 1965. In protest of the legislative response to the civil rights movement, Lloyd burst into the chambers in blackface and a loincloth. Lloyd was quickly arrested and proceedings resumed. More nautical analogies inform the following chapters. Rockwell discusses the importance of charts in navigating hazards while at sea. Just as a captain relies on the accuracy of his chart to avoid rocky or icy areas of water, the ship of state needs the right moral, cultural, and political chart to stay on course. Rockwell points to the turbulence of the 1960s as evidence that chart forgers and crooked captains are working with shipwreckers to bring down and plunder America, all of which is at the hands of the communist Jewish conspiracy.
This is one of those convenient neighborhood shopping centers. The grocery store is open to 11 p.m. There's a barber and a hairdresser and a cleaner, a hamburger stand, and an automatic laundry. As the crow flies, it's about 10 miles or so from Capitol Hill. George Lincoln Rockwell, leader of stormtroopers and believer in genocide, was doing his laundry this noon. He came out of this money-saving, coin-operated laundry. He went over to his car in this parking space. He got in, and he backed away. And as he did so, from up there, suddenly 2 shots rang out. People in the stores heard them. Somebody in the laundromat heard footsteps on the roof.
Did he appear at all nervous when he was in here?
No, he appeared very, like a businessman. I would have said that he was a businessman.
How was he dressed?
Well, I thought he had dark navy blue trousers on and a white shirt. That would have been my observation. I didn't closely observe the man, other than his manners were very cordial, very gentlemanlike. He put his clothes in each tub, those 2 tubs, and then he put his detergent in, and he started the machine, and he said, "Oh, I've got something." I don't know whether he said detergent or what. He said, "I forgot something," and he went out. And I took my clothes over and put them in the dryer, and it didn't cross, never for one moment did I know it was Rockwell. And then the assistant to the proprietor of the laundromat came in and said, "Rockwell's been shot."
Did you know who Rockwell was when he said that?
No, I still didn't know it was this young man that I had offered this second washing machine.
Did you know who George Lincoln Rockwell was when you heard the name?
Well, yes, indeed, I knew who Mr. Rockwell was. I know that Mr. Rockwell is a man that has an opinion. And I know that we have the greatest country on earth, and I know that it's only great because we have the freedom of speech. And whether we be Jews or Catholic or Protestant or Negro, all of them have their own little pet grievances. All of them have their little pet groups. And for that reason, I never opposed Rockwell in any way. I didn't know him, so I didn't adhere to his ways. but I would have been the last person on earth to speak one word in opposition to that man, because if we have no freedom of speech, if we destroy his freedom of speech, then we have no freedom of speech. We don't deserve any freedom of speech.
Now tell me this.
If we're going to destroy that man.
How will you remember him?
I will remember Mr. Rockwell as a tall, handsome, neatly dressed man that came into the laundromat very graciously. And I was impressed with the charm of this individual, and I was most happy that I could give him a second washing machine, and I'll remember him just that way as a very charming man.
And you do have a suspect. There is a man now who has been taken into custody, who has gone to the Violations Bureau, where a committing magistrate will advise him of his rights.
The only indication that he was connected with the Rockwell movement?
That you'll have to ask Inspector Cole.
We won't be able to question him at all.
I've had information here at the scene he was formerly associated or presently associated or something with it. Don't know what he was associated, how he was associated, but that he was associated.
John Patsalos was born January 6, 1938 in New York City to Christos, a Greek immigrant, and Athena Patsalos, the daughter of Greek immigrants. On October 7, 1943, Christos shot Athena to death as she attempted to flee the home. He was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Sing Sing. 5-year-old John and his younger brother George lived with their maternal grandmother. Growing up in Harlem amid the firm racial divides of the time instilled a tribalist sensibility in John early on. His grandmother sold flowers on the street to get by. Seeing her get undercut by Jewish merchants laid the foundation for John's deep-rooted anti-Semitism. In 1953, Christos was granted parole and began pursuing custody of his sons. His grandmother passed away soon after, leaving the two with few options. Home life quickly turned untenable, and John and his brother were soon placed in youth house. The same facility another derelict 13-year-old named Lee Harvey Oswald had come through. John was picked up for auto theft at age 15 and placed on probation. In school, John became editor and cartoonist at the school newspaper. He also developed an interest in activism, which led to his connecting with DeWest Hooker, who was scouting recruits for a youth branch of his Nationalist Party. In 1955, John designed his first leaflet, calling for a boycott of Jewish businessmen he believed were attempting to take over the Board of Trade for City Island near the Bronx. He was arrested trying to pass them out, and although no charges were filed, he was determined to have violated probation and committed to Morrisania Hospital for evaluation. The psychiatric report notes a fixation on anti-Semitic beliefs, paranoia, and repressed homosexuality. John claimed that the test administrator refused to accept his answers until he gave her the response she wanted, and that the doctors assumed that anyone who showed manifestations of anti-Jewishness had to be mentally ill. At his next probation hearing, Patsalos was committed to Bellevue Hospital for 30 days and remained in jail for another 2 weeks. With Hooker's help, he was released after obtaining an independent evaluation that contradicted Morrisania's. Patsalos became active in Hooker's Nationalist Youth League. Early on, he was dispatched to D.C. to picket alongside Floyd Fleming for the release of white nationalist John Casper.
The argument simply does not hold that the white race, being a minority, rather being a majority in the United States, should turn over to a group of people only removed from slavery 80 years and only removed from the jungle by a few hundred years. Turn over to them the control of our entire civilization.
Hooker began to run out of cash by 1957 and disbanded the Nationalist Youth League to set up a 7-Eleven franchise in Italy. At Hooker's going-away gathering, Patsalos was introduced to Naval Commander George Lincoln Rockwell. Patsalos enlisted in the Marines in 1958. He'd kept in touch with Rockwell and was one of the earliest members to join the Woofens. He was one of the youths that marched with Rockwell at his 1958 Lebanon protest. He was stationed with the military police unit at Quantico, allowing him to participate in ANP rallies and demonstrations. His party activities were quickly noticed by the military, and he did himself no favor by legally changing his last name to Patler around this time. On June 6, 1960, he received a general discharge under honorable conditions from the Marines. Now a full-time party member, Patler began speaking ahead of Rockwell at weekly rallies in D.C. His trade experience in printing and art background would be a useful asset to the party. By the fourth issue of the National Socialist Bulletin, Patler was promoted to editor. He also became their chief illustrator, designing cartoons that would be used in many of the party's publications. Patler married Erika Forngrundler, a 19-year-old German-American affiliated with the group. The couple would soon have 2 children together. Working alongside Patler in the print shop was Dan Burroughs, another party officer who'd come up through the Nationalist Youth League. By most accounts, Burroughs was emotionally unstable, ruthless, vicious, and narcissistic. The two left the A&P in November 1961 to start up their own party in New York. Burroughs was also a confidential informant for the FBI and gave his first report to the New York field office November 26th. In the report, Burroughs states he and Patler left for ideological reasons, but admits that Rockwell sent them to set up a shadow recruiting organization in New York and told them to formally resign so no legal issues could be tied back to the party. Burroughs also details the publication of the first edition of This Time the World. According to Burroughs, after writing was finished in December 1960, Rockwell abandoned all other activities to have the first run of 300 copies finished and shipped by the end of 1961. His hope was that the demand from this edition would boost his chances of finding a commercial printer willing to work with him. Adding to the tedious process of printing and binding books by hand was its 441-page length. Between Rockwell's long-windedness and intolerance of criticism, any further editing would not be considered. Burroughs stated that they were to use their New York operation to promote sales of the book as well as attract new prospects. At its peak, membership in the American National Party consisted of Burroughs, Patler and his wife, along with former Nazi Party members Ralph Grandinetti and Luke Dahmer. Patler chose a logo for the new party evocative of, but legally distinct from, the swastika, a stylized sunwheel. They began producing literature and staging semi-organized anti-communist demonstrations around New York City. The first issue of the party publication Kill magazine came out that July. In what appears to be overcompensation for his FBI involvement, Burroughs' lead editorial, The Importance of Killing, openly calls for violence. In an FAQ, Patler criticizes the American Nazi Party for being too soft on racial issues. Burroughs told the FBI that the party focused on race because New Yorkers were less likely to be receptive to anti-Semitic messaging. He also claimed the inflammatory tone of Kill was solely to generate publicity. On August 22, 1962, Patler was sentenced to 10 days in jail for picketing and distributing Kill at an NAACP rally in Englewood, New Jersey. Regarding himself as a political prisoner, Patler went on a hunger strike, which was picked up by the papers. In a letter to Erika while in Bergen County Jail, he attributes his poor choices to youthful inexperience, noting that Rockwell has no excuse, not at his age anyway. Issue number 3 of Kill magazine the next month had no mention of Dan Burroughs. In his next report to the FBI, Burroughs stated Rockwell had expressed willingness to take Patler back, but that a number of A&P members hated Burroughs and would never approve his readmission. Patler was arrested again November 10th while picketing in New York City. He was in jail until January 3rd, 1963. By this time, Erika had made an ultimatum. It was her or Rockwell. The February 1963 issue of Kill would make Patler's choice clear. It includes a 6-page article he wrote while in Dutchess County Jail called Rockwell Was Right, along with an article favorably comparing him to then-President John F. Kennedy. It also contained an article called Startling Expose of a Right-Wing Fink, the story of Dan the Fink. Dan Burroughs drifted in and out of various white supremacist outfits around the South. His contact information was found on Lee Harvey Oswald when Oswald was arrested in Dallas on November 22nd. Burroughs became Grand Dragon of the New York chapter of the Imperial Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in 1964. On October 31st, 1965, the New York Times ran the headline, State Klan Leader Hides Secret of Jewish Origin. Staying with a friend in Reading, Pennsylvania, Burroughs read the article and declared, "I have nothing to live for." He shot himself first in the chest and then in the head.
Are we finished on the Burroughs? I have reproduced at the top of this paper here his editorial on killing and murder.
I think Burroughs had some psychological problems.
Oh, I think he was entirely... All you have to do is read his editorial here and see the way he writes and how he thinks. Well, for instance, when he was here, his favorite occupation, whenever he could get away with it, was choking the party dog. We had a dog named Gas Chamber, and he used to choke the dog like mad until I'd stop him.
What was the dog's name?
Gas Chamber. And he would really take a insane glee in choking the dog, and I couldn't understand that. And one of his greatest inventions that he considered his stroke of genius was his torture organ. What he developed was an electronic machine in which wires would be inserted in the victim, and then he was going to have a piano keyboard connected with a volume control so that he could press the pedals and push all these different things and have the guy screaming in agony as the electricity hit him in different places.
Out of everyone in the American Nazi Party, Rockwell and Patler had a unique relationship. Patler's unsubtle admiration and emulation of Rockwell earned him favor with the commander.
Long live Commander Rockwell! Long live Commander Rockwell!
But personality clashes created an escalating pattern of Patler openly defying and denouncing Rockwell, only to become penitent and groveling a couple days later. The rank and file of the A&P had mixed feelings about Patler coming back. Around fellow Nazis, Patler had always been insecure about his olive skin and dark features. The debatability over the proper whiteness of his Greek heritage became a point of contention among some in the party. Matt Cale, in particular, disliked Patler and referred to him as greasy. By 1963, the Stormtrooper was maintaining a consistent bi-monthly release schedule. Patler's cartoons had begun appearing in the September-October edition, and he took over as editor of the Stormtrooper in the following issue. In 1964, he put out 3 of the scheduled 6 issues, none of which included his cartoons. While he would bring his artwork back in 1965, the first issue didn't make it to press until summer, and only one more would come out that winter. The next edition, spring 1966, includes a 5-page graphic novel by Patler called White Man. If the superhero's resemblance to Rockwell wasn't obvious enough, his alter ego, Lou Corr, leaves no doubt who inspired the character. By the end of 1966, Patler had only finished 2 out of 6 issues for the second year in a row. While Know Your Officer had been a mainstay of the publication, past entries had been limited to a brief column. The first edition of the Stormtrooper in 1967, Volume 6, Number 1, was Patler's turn as featured party officer. And as editor, he expanded this segment to an 11-page autobiography. In that issue, he'd also neglected to include any advertising for other A&P publications, one of the few revenue sources for the party. Aside from Patler increasingly injecting his own presence into the magazine, his inability to maintain a steady production schedule had led to a drop-off in subscription renewals for the party's flagship publication, more income they could not afford to lose. On April 4th, 1967, Patler was expelled from the party. Patler had married a second time to Alice Irvin in 1964. She'd left him in 1966, taking their 2 children with her, but had not gotten a divorce. Patler began reconnecting with them after leaving the party, and was on good enough terms with Alice's father, Sam Irvin, to have keys and free access to his Arlington house as well as his farm in Highland County. Patler kept in touch with some party members over the summer of 1967. Christopher Wisniewicz would testify that on 3 separate occasions that June, Patler made this statement, "Rockwell is an evil genius and he must be stopped." Wisniewicz described Patler as bitter about his ouster from the A&P. He stated Patler was working on a new group he planned to call the White Power Committee, and quoted him as saying, "We're going to stop him." Other witnesses at trial would corroborate this testimony.
At approximately 12 noon, this date, the police department dispatcher communications received a phone call which was anonymous from a woman stating that the man had been shot in
a shopping center, are given the location of 6000 block of Wilson Boulevard in Arlington.
On August 25th, 1967, George Lincoln Rockwell was washing his camper curtains at the laundromat across Wilson Boulevard from Hatemonger Hill. At 11:58 a.m., he stepped outside to grab detergent from his car. 2 shots from the roof of the Dominion Hills shopping center pierced through the windshield and hit Rockwell in the chest. He collapsed next to his car and bled to death in the parking lot. Inspector R.S. Cole of the Arlington Police was one of the first officers to respond, and he began combing the area for suspects in an unmarked vehicle. At 12:25, he was about a mile out, heading west on Washington Boulevard, when he spotted a man who matched witness descriptions walking on the north side, wiping his face with a towel. He circled around to intercept him. The man was spotted again at a bus stop on Washington and Englewood Street. As Inspector Cole approached, the suspect took off running south between 2 houses. A few minutes later, Detective Ernest Davis notified Cole they'd picked up the suspect 2 blocks away on Washington and Harrison Street. Upon arrival, Cole, who had frequent encounters with the ANP since 1960, immediately recognized the suspect as John Patler. He was sweating heavily, and his shoes and pants were soaked up to the knee. The next day, the police found a Mauser 7.62mm pistol, serial number 9811, with a distinctive broomstick handle stock, in Bon Air Park, about halfway between Dominion Hills and the area he was picked up. Police later found matching shell casings on Sam Irvin's farmland, and a farmhand testified to witnessing Patler target shooting with the pistol at the farm that summer. Robert Lloyd had purchased the gun in 1962 and was the registered owner. At trial, he testified he loaned the gun to Patler in 1964 and tried multiple times to get it back from him without success. Other witnesses backed up Lloyd's testimony, and ballistics testing connected the weapon and shells to the murder. Patler consistently maintained his innocence and took the stand in his own defense, but was found guilty. The court recommended the death penalty given the extended deliberation of the murder, but the jury gave Patler a 20-year sentence. In 1970, he changed his name back to Pat Salos and renounced all Nazi beliefs. After 8 years, Pat Salos was paroled in 1975, though he would serve another 6 years on a violation. He has since maintained a low profile and refused any interview requests. A Washington Post article from 2017 mentions that his Facebook page showed him to be an avid supporter of then-President Donald Trump.
I have a news release. In spite of all obstruction by military and civilian authorities, we are continuing our efforts to inter Commander Rockwell's mortal remains in accordance with his express wishes. Arrangements have been made with a Fredericksburg funeral director for burial on the party's property in Spotsylvania, but it was learned that injunctions would be filed contesting this right, further delaying decent interment. We are appalled by the lack of normal human decency shown by these officials in obstructing interment with petty technicalities. We shall continue to honor Commander Rockwell's wishes to the best of our ability. End of release. I can only answer a few questions, gentlemen.
What are his wishes?
His wishes are to be buried with full Nazi honors.
Rockwell's brother Bobby had made arrangements to have him buried on the family plot in Maine. After stormtroopers surrounded his home, Bobby surrendered the body to Matt Cale.
He had been denied, he had been refused interment at any national cemetery as he had requested.
The VA insisted that no Nazi imagery or behavior would be tolerated. When the party defied this condition at his funeral procession, Rockwell was denied burial at Culpeper National Cemetery.
We were simply unable to find a place to lay him to rest. He was cremated.
What have you done with the ashes here on the grounds? Is he buried here?
They are on these grounds, yes, sir.
Today, Rockwell's ashes remain guarded by a close circle of loyalists. On August 25, 2017, they were photographed at an undisclosed location in remembrance of the 50th anniversary of his assassination.
Loss for the white community. What kind of leadership can you define? What you think that Mr. Rockwell's contribution was